Hi everyone.
Hello.
How's it going? Just wait a little bit for more people to join.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Or morning, depending on where you are, or evening, actually.
Yeah, it's just morning for me right now, 9 o'clock.
It's 3 p.m. here in the UK.
Oh, cool.
5 p.m. Ukraine.
What a weird and wonderful mix.
Mm-hmm. Did you say Ukraine?
Yes, I'm from Ukraine now.
Oh boy.
What part of Ukraine?
Which city are you in?
Now, in the west. Yes, in the west part. So for now, it's safe.
Uh-huh.
On the
Oh
south.
boy. Okay. Are you close to a border?
Yes, close to Europe border.
Okay. All right.
Few kilometers.
Do you still have internet working? I guess over there, huh?
Yes, it's working, but the speed of the internet is dropped after war began. So sometimes problems with access.
If things get too bad, you can get instant visa to the UK now. You can come to where I am, and we can just talk about Shardium all day. Turn the call together.
For sure, but I can't cross the board because I'm man and I'm not.
Yes.
Yeah, terrible situation right now. See, this is all due to nation states having too much power, really. And that power basically comes from them being able to create their own money, as opposed to really depending on taxes for the money. And that's something we have to change in the future going forward. I mean, because the way things are right now, I think humanity will destroy itself if we just continue to let these nation states have this much power.
Then China will have too much power.
Yeah.
Hey, Omar. Hey, guys.
Hey, Greg, how's it going?
Good.
I love that shirt.
Oh, thank you. Always on vacation on the weekends. That's my mindset. So I'll post this link again in the Shardium Discord. See if anyone else wants to join. And yeah. Omar, I know you wanted to talk about node rewards today and brainstorm there a little bit. I'm sure we'll get some other Q&A coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have questions while we wait, just about Shardium, the technology? Omar, you want to give just a quick overview of where Shardium's at right now and what the team's focused on and the roadmap?
Yeah, definitely. So, basically we're working towards the Alphanet launch, and that'll be, probably sometime in April. This past week was really bad for the tech team. We had some people on the tech team have so one of our developers, his mom got really sick and she's in hospice care right now, and he's having to spend some time taking care of her, and that kind of slowed things down a bit. And then we also lost a developer. He literally, I think, overdosed on some drugs and he's passed away. So that was kind of like a really shocking thing for the team. But yeah, anyways, so yeah, we're working towards getting the Alphanet ready. Let me see. And for the Alphanet, let me see, is that document?
Hey, Jairaj.
Hi, guys.
Thanks for joining.
Yep.
So for the Alphanet, basically what we want to do is just put up a network that people can just play with in terms of posting contracts to it, have a little faucet where they can get SHM, and then just see how the network feels really. So it's not going to be a sharded network right now. It'll just be a small network of like 20 nodes. We'll have like 5 archiver nodes, collecting and storing the transaction history. And we'll have like node rotation going on, like about 30 nodes. And initially, when we first launched the Alphanet, we'll probably just have like the nodes run by the team. And then as time goes on, we'll during that quarter, we'll allow community nodes to be added as well. But initially, it's just to deploy apps to it, experiment with it, and also gives us a little bit of chance to let you see what that network feels like and get some feedback on it.
Cool. So Alphanet won't be sharded, right? Just deploying.
Yeah, it'll just right. Yeah, that initial network won't be sharded.
Great.
Yeah. Now for BetaNet, we're planning to shoot for. Let's see. So when we initially launch it, it'll be sharded with probably a shard size of 50. That's probably not what we want to use at in production. But yeah, just initially we'll just use like 50, and then we'll have like about 250 nodes in the network. And we'll start with about 300 nodes total, so there'll be some rotation going on. And so that kind of gives us about like a 5x speed up than what we had in the unsharded network. And then we'll allow community members to be able to join nodes as well on that. And that'll probably have about like 10 archive nodes running.
Nice. It looks like some more people have joined. I don't know, Omar, if you want to start conversation now about node rewards, or if you want to Q&A first.
Yeah, let's just do a little Q&A in case anybody had some questions. Definitely, because I don't always get a chance to keep reading the Discord, and so I may not be able to get to your questions, but I'd like to give you guys an opportunity to just ask me questions directly. So if we don't have any questions, let's kind of get started with the node reward discussion.
There was one question that you haven't answered yet in the, I think I got to find the question in the white paper discuss channel.
which is a venture capital firm, private equity firm, kind of invest in lots of different asset classes now. And my whole job is to write and speak.
That person. Yeah, Ingamels, I think you asked a question on the white paper channel about slashing, and Omar didn't get around.
Oh yeah, I just did answer it a little while ago.
Yeah, I was going to ask this question just now, but I'm not sure if it was the right forum. I'd just be interested to get your perspective on how you see slashing working. Obviously,
yeah, I definitely think that there needs to be something that is not just like one set rule or anything like that. Depending on what kind of misbehavior there was, you would slash different amounts. And then also, ideally I'd like to have some sort of a reputation build up over time for a node, so that let's say we know that this node's been behaving really well for a long time, but then that and it's been participating, like let's say for a year, and has a good reputation. And then if it maybe had a bad day or something like that, where the network was flaky, it doesn't get slashed as much, right? So maybe we could have some sort of a reputation aspect to the slashing, where the higher reputation you have, the base slash amount would then kind of be like maybe reduced a little bit if you had higher reputation, something like that, right? So to make it a little bit smarter in that sense. But
the punishment for something like downtime would be a lot less severe than the punishment for something like double signing, right? I assume at that point the stake would be lost, and then something would be done with the tokens from that point. Is there any thought gone into that yet?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that I think I'd mentioned that somewhere, like in a talk or something. But yeah, there's certain things where like it's like ridiculously obvious that you're trying to misbehave, right? Like if you sign, one transaction saying, hey, this, or one vote saying this transaction is valid, and then you sign another vote saying that same transaction is invalid, right? So, those kind of things, like if you get caught trying to tell two different nodes two different things, you can get really slashed badly for things like that. But yeah, like if you had some downtime, you're not really going to get slashed that much for it. Like we already have the capability in our network where we can detect nodes that are down, and you'll just get kicked out of the network, right? And another node will be able to join the network in your place and take over. Because, we have like this node rotation concept, and we have this concept of standby nodes. So, we need all the nodes, working properly. And if you have like, some outage or something like that, well, most likely you'll just be like kicked out of the network. Now, if you do things like, hey, you're submitting these join requests, but then, when we ask you to join, you're not actually, when we accept you into the network, you're not actually, joining and getting synced up and participating. Well, for that, you can get slashed. So we're going to have to think through a lot of these finer details of different ways that nodes can misbehave, and then define how much slashing would happen for those things. So.
And do you think there's any benefit in a more? I read on the forum on the Discord that the general consensus is that the slashing for downtime would be really light because of those standby nodes. But do you see any benefit in having the slashing a bit more severe, so that the likelihood of downtime is less, meaning you would need less standby nodes, meaning you'd be having to reward those? And I know the rewards for being a standby node versus a archive node and a validator node is up for discussion. But the question is, do you see any value in harsher slashing for downtime, resulting in theory more uptime, resulting in theory not having to have as many standby nodes, because you'd expect the network to be a bit more stable if the slashing was a bit more severe for downtime?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to, see how things pan out. One of the things that I would like to do is allow these parameters to be adjusted even after the network has launched. And with, the way we'll be architecting the application side of Shardium, it'll be possible to do that. Initially, maybe the foundation will be able to just change those, but we'll have community input on those parameters. But then over time, once we have a mechanism in place for a DAO, then those things could be completely directed by the DAO, and the foundation doesn't need to be involved. But yeah, so I would like to keep a lot of these things kind of flexible, where there's these network parameters for how the application works, and then we can tweak these parameters depending on how things are panning out, rather than just hard coding them, and then we have to do a software upgrade to get everybody to change, right? So yeah.
Hey Andrew, how long does it take for nodes to sync with the network from standby to validator?
Well, they're super fast when there's not a ton of data in the network, but and they're still they're still very fast compared to traditional networks, because they're just syncing the account state for the range of shards that they're going to be holding. So yeah. The time varies on the amount of data in the network, how old the network is, but relatively speaking, it's not like playing back every Bitcoin transaction ever.
Yeah, it'll be more in the order of minutes as opposed to days or weeks.
Is Ingamel's idea, for increasing, the slashing penalty for downtime, does that bring up sort of, I don't know what the correct name for this attack would be. I don't know, not like a DDoS attack, but basically people are trying to attack the network who, flood the standby nodes pool with their standby nodes. And then, the second they're brought into the network, the nodes go down. So we're in this constant state of back and forth, trying to add more nodes to the network because nodes are going down in validation if the reward or the slashing mechanism isn't harsh enough. Is that is there potential for that?
Could be. Yeah, I mean, there's always possibility of nodes joining the network and then not doing anything, and not necessarily being down, acting like they're still up when you check to see they're up, but say not processing transactions and so forth. So that's one way of misbehaving. But for example, if they're not voting, other nodes can see that this node hasn't voted on any transactions. And so, when they ask for the reward, we could deduct the reward, or we could, take the harder route of, we're actually going to slash some percent of your stake that you had put up. So.
And is there any benefit? You mentioned having some form of reputation that you'd build up with the network. So is there any benefit in having that for the standby nodes? And I know most likely what will happen is a node will go down, then it's most likely going to be some form of a lottery to work out how a standby node becomes more of a validator.
An active node, yeah.
Is there any kind of thought behind using that trust mechanism with that lottery system to make sure that you're taking online the more trustworthy standby nodes as opposed to random nodes, to avoid this kind of standby.
Yeah, I think probably shouldn't do that, because we want to, like, one of the benefits that you get with having a lot of standby nodes is you get like a higher level of decentralization. Yeah, and so having it random as in terms of like which node gets to join, and not starting to use any reputation at that point, I think is probably better in order to maintain that high level of decentralization. Otherwise, what you'd end up with, like, even though you might have like, 5,000 nodes in standby, you're still kind of like more biased towards selecting certain subset of them, right? So it kind of reduces your decentralization. So I would probably want to still keep the selection process very random, but in terms of like, nodes that have built a good reputation, especially for, and then, if they have an issue, like, their downtime or something like that happens, then you don't necessarily want to punish them as much as, say, a node that you don't know anything about yet.
Makes sense.
Yeah, Andrew, I think you also mentioned there's some, like, it needs to be completely random, otherwise there's a security risk.
Yeah, and that's the decentralization Omar mentioned. But yeah, every time I've thought to myself, like, oh, is there a way we could make this more user-friendly, or, for people trying to get in, like, oh, what if they've been waiting a long time? Any of those, all of those just like quickly lead down the path of like ruining randomness. If you ruin the randomness, you can exploit it. So we just want to keep that standby list fully random. But the nice thing about it being a fully random lottery is then for anyone to attack it, they would have to have, to do anything significant, they'd have to have more nodes than like everybody else. So that becomes, very problematic.
Yeah, and then, it's not just having a node, but then you have to have, some amount staked already on that account. And then we could even add things like the age of the amount that you've staked, right? Like we could have like, oh, you have to have these coins sitting on this address for at least a week or something like that. So you can't just like, put coins on an address and start trying to join right away, right? So, things like that can slow down somebody from trying to create a whole bunch of nodes.
And is there any benefit to staking more? So take something like Harmony 1. If you try to become a validator node, I think it's 10,001 tokens to become a validator, but to do it by yourself is pointless because it has some kind of mechanism where it tries to pick validators that have more of its token. Is there going to be anything like that, or is that just completely out of the question?
Yeah, we're probably going to shoot for something like you have to have a minimum of a certain amount on this address. And, okay, so there's a trade-off, right? Because if you increase that amount, you're going to make it more difficult for people to, be able to participate in validation. If you decrease that amount, it kind of makes it a little bit easier for people to misbehave too, because like, hey, if I try to misbehave and I even lose everything, it's maybe not that much, right? So, but maybe that'll, kind of offset things too, because if the amount you stake is lower, then there might be like, maybe 50,000 nodes sitting there, trying to join, and somebody trying to put a bad node into the network is going to have a harder time trying to get that node in, right? So the way I look at it is like, what is the total amount that's kind of being staked by the network? And there's probably some sort of a optimal point, like if you ever seen those graphs where, like if you increase the amount, it helps, the amount that's being staked, then you want to find, like, it's probably some sort of a parabolic curve where, the total amount being staked into the network is maximized, right?
But to answer directly, I think his question was: is there any benefit? Like once the requirement of total amount of SHM is met, you staked the amount that is required. There's no bias on the nodes based on who stakes more than others, right?
Yeah. So in terms of selecting which nodes get in, we probably don't want to use fully how much you've staked as a factor in deciding who gets to get in.
You just need to meet that minimum threshold.
And that's kind of a nice segue into another question that's kind of gone around the thought forum that there's been a few different answers to. We spoke about that minimum threshold, and I appreciate that hasn't been determined yet because it probably needs to be fluid. But there's a question that I wrote about the use case of Avalanche, how when it started, I think you need 2,000 tokens to become a validator, which was about $2,000 at the time of launch. Now that's about $150,000, and they can't change very easily the amount of tokens. So it means they haven't forethought that the value of each token would go up to, I think it's $72. So their adoption of validators is currently, it's at zero almost, because the risk of putting $150,000 into a relatively new, although growing cryptocurrency. So there's been a discussion that we've been having around, say the amount on day one is 10,000 tokens, and that's a token, imagine it was just $1, so it's $10,000 to become a validator. But in say 3 years' time, again, the same thing as Avalanche, where the greatest thing happens and everything goes wonderful, and it's maybe $100 per token. There almost needs to be some form of automatic mechanism that reduces the amount of tokens required to become a validator, because in the way that this network's going to work and the way the Shardium works, you do need to have a lot of validators. And if you put a barrier up like what Avalanche have done, the adoption is just going to be kind of, zero, not zero, but limited to whales, basically, and people have massive financial benefit, which takes away the whole purpose of the decentralization. So is there any thought going into that? I mean, we discussed about using almost the price, the 6 monthly average price of the coin to so every 6 months it looks back and goes, right, what is the value of the coin, what percentage has it gone up, and does that relay into the minimum amount needed, and it slowly tears it down over time to kind of keep it almost a consistent US dollar figure rather than a number of tokens to keep that barrier to entry at the same level. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's I think that's actually an interesting research topic that somebody really needs to write a paper on. But essentially, what the other thing that's happening with these networks is that their total value locked is going up, and so now you start to have to weigh, okay, how much is the network total stake, versus the total value locked, right? And so if that's going up, but this amount doesn't increase, then somebody could say oh, wow, you know what? There's a lot of money on this network. If I, able to take over all these nodes and put a lot of money into doing the staking, and I overtake the network, then I have access to a lot of capital here, right? So that's why this going up also has to happen. And so the total value locked in the network, as that goes up with the coin price going up, there should be some staking. The total value staked also needs to be going up, but it maybe doesn't need to go up quite as fast as the total value locked. And so you could have some parameter that says, okay, instead of 100 units that we used to require to be staked, maybe the coin has gone up 10x now, and so instead of like making it 10 units that you need to stake, maybe we'll reduce it to like, 50 or 30 or something like that. So you still getting a benefit of, increasing the total value staked, but also not making it like extremely out of reach for people. So, and that's where I think, it's going to be very important for all these parameters to be tweakable, and, for the community to discuss and talk about what's going on with the network, and then being able to send updates to these parameters without having to redeploy the software, right? So,
and Andrew, is there a way to make like, these parameters, specifically the total stake amount, like dynamic and fixed to a US dollar amount rather than like an amount of SHM, so we don't need to, as a community, vote every 30 days on, updating the staked amount?
We'd need some, trusted oracle to make sure that we're getting the right data. But yeah, I think at first, I don't know, maybe Omar wants to say something.
Yeah, I think it'd be like too tricky right now to try to do it with oracles, because when things are automated like that, people will try to play with the price and things like that, or DDoS your oracles and things like that. So I think it's much safer initially, at least, to just have community voting, and
so the stake amount can at least be dynamic based on community input, rather than just fixing it to, like 2,000 Avalanche tokens, like he said, or 2,000 SHM tokens or coins, and having the value of those coins skyrocket, and then, the stake amount stuff high.
And we can even have a plan that's like, this is the general, the pricing algorithm when we're going to follow, and that, and the community can have input to that plan, and then that plan gets followed. So it's not like the community has to vote every 3 days on a new like exact value or something.
Right.
I also wanted to say, like, is the like Omar's talking about the value locked to network going up and having to raise the amount of stake, because of the way Shardium is wanting to, like, one of our big things is to be used by a lot of people and be super decentralized. So just the number of nodes. So if your value of SHM goes up like 10x, but the actual like number of nodes participating in the network goes up 10x also, well, then maybe then the actual like number of nodes participating helps spread around the value we need to lock in stake, and helps keep it accessible by individuals.
Yeah, absolutely right. So if the number of like standby nodes is increasing, then that increases our total value staked as well. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, we could probably transition to the node rewards discussion now. Before we do that, there was one comment I think is something that we definitely should do. Please make an agreement or any document copy where it's mentioned team members or early investors don't sell their coins for 2 years, or basically like the community just needs some assurance that we're not gonna dump all of our the development team isn't gonna dump the tokens on month 1 and then leave the project. So I think giving some assurance to the community would be good. But anyways.
I think we do have something about that in the light paper already, right? So if we look at the light paper, wasn't there a mention of like a 2-year linear vesting for the team and the sale?
Yeah, 3-month cliff and 2-year linear vesting.
Right.
Great. So you want to move to the node reward discussion?
Sure. Yeah, so, basically, we have a total of, 508 million SHM, and out of that, 51% is being allocated to, operating the network and rewarding the miners. So that makes it about 259 million 8,000 SHM that'll be set aside for node rewards. So these actually, these coins, these SHM coins, probably won't actually get created at all. They'll just be created on the fly as they get rewarded. Similar to how in the Bitcoin network, new Bitcoins get created when they're rewarded. So one of the questions, is like, how many years do we want to keep this, distribution going? So in order to reach like some fixed amount of SHM that will be given out, we're probably going to take some sort of a curve similar to like Bitcoins, where every period, some amount of time, we reduce the amount of coins that get released by some factor percentage. Like in the example of Bitcoin, it's like a 50% reduction every 4 years, right? So as long as you do any kind of reduction, it could even be like 1%, and any kind of time period even as well, you will eventually hit some asymptotic level. Now, the asymptotic level that we're trying to hit is that 259 million kind of number, and we can, if we decide how long do we want this reward to be given out and what we want our period to be, then knowing that we want the asymptote to be this level, that will determine how many SHM would need to be given initially, and so forth. So the things to decide are like, over how much of a time do we want this to be? What should the period of change? How often do we want to do a reduction, and then how much reduction do we want to do? Like, should it be like 50% or 10% or whatever? And all these things will then determine, what should be that initial amount that we start releasing in terms of SHM. So does anybody have any opinion on how long we should distribute, over what period of time?
I haven't researched the topic enough to know the benefit of releasing over 30 years versus releasing over 15 years.
So I guess the one thing to know about that time period is that when we get close to okay, we don't have any more SHM to give out, then the nodes would be rewarded only by the transaction fees. And so you would get into an era where, you would expect the value of the token is high enough that the transaction fees are sufficient to provide, cover the operating costs plus, profit for the node operators.
So basically the timeline is like, the 15-year, 30-year period is just added incentivization to attract nodes.
Exactly.
So we rely solely on just the transaction fees.
Right. And so usually at the beginning, you'll be actually giving out more coins as node rewards. And so that at the beginning helps incentivize more nodes to be, participating. But as time goes on, you want the value of the token to go up, plus you want the amount of transactions happening on the network to continue to increase. And so then that way the transaction fees can end up replacing the node reward.
And is there a risk if you release all of these too quickly that the inflation rate, in theory, the inflation rate is higher? I'm sorry, I missed the first bit of this conversation. I had to step away from the computer, so I'm just jumping in halfway through. But the shorter the period of time, the number of coins is the same, so the inflation rate is higher. And I suppose what you want the early adopters to hold on to their tokens and coins. And if working in the house. If the period is shorter, that inflation is higher, it makes the early adopters less likely to hold their coins, because obviously you're kind of not flooding the market, but there's a lot more coming on the into fluidity almost. So is that also another consideration we need to think about?
Yeah, absolutely. Like with the number of coins being released earlier is going to be more than what it ends up being in the later part. You're going to have a lot more inflation towards the beginning. So that's another factor to consider.
Well, yeah, I guess wouldn't it make sense then just to have like the minimum viable added incentive for node operators? Like if you look at other network, every other blockchain, which smart contract platform has successfully added the minimum incentive to attract node operators, so you don't flood the market with SHM too early, but still have enough to attract node operators. Maybe we could do some research on other smart contract platforms and what their node incentive is and how many node operators they've attracted over each period.
That kind of information might be good to have something like that. I don't know if anybody's made like a spreadsheet of like the different coins and what were their schedule.
So I think it's without like looking at other data, like people are already doing this. We shouldn't try to be the guinea pigs all over again and do this for the first time. We should look at the data of the other systems and see what their results have been, and then make our decision based on that, instead of just figuratively trying to decide what the best outcome will be.
Absolutely. Although it's a little bit more complicated because it's always going to be hard to determine, like, was this a good set of parameters that they used, right? How do you determine the success of that network?
It's almost like trying to predict the future, right? Because you're trying to work out what the coin will be in the future. So you may do a halving after a set amount of years, but if the coin doesn't have the right value at that point, then there's no incentive for people to join the network. So it's trying to predict the future, but the logic would dictate you to keep it dynamic, but you can't do that because you need to have a plan for early investors to invest. So it's a really complicated one to wrap your head around.
Yeah, definitely.
I almost wonder if we could do something crazy, like have a vote in like a community vote in like 5 years and 10 years that like helps like reset the half-life of it or whatever. I don't
Yeah, although I think then, the uncertainty that things are going to change in the future makes people a little bit nervous about the whole
policy changes. People just back out straight away. That's
yeah.
the thing.
I think one of the things that people like about Bitcoin is that, it's a well-defined monetary system, right? The amount of coins in circulation is well-defined and known, and that's one of its biggest attractions. So now, for sure, like, we don't want this distribution to be like a few years, right? I think at the very least we want something like maybe 20 years. But on the high end, like, do we want it to be like hundreds of years or maybe 1,000 years? And so at the end of the day, it'll kind of come down to like how many coins are, once we determine how long we want it to go, and what period we do a reduction and what would be the reduction amount, that is going to determine how many SHM is going to be given initially. And then what we can do is look at how much do we think the value of that SHM will be on the market, and then try to figure out, like, would that be enough for somebody to pay their node operating costs, right?
The initial point that Andrew made about essentially changing it over time, that idea, if it wouldn't make people back out, would be a good idea. Could you not literally have, so like the halving was every, say, 5 years, could you not build something in that said, if the value of the network or each coin was X, it would halve, or it would quarter, or it would third, and then you've still got a solid monetary policy that you'll know exactly what will happen, but it's dependent on the success of the coin, and that would extend that period of time if that was the case. So it's still solid monetary policy. You're not changing anything because you dictate that, but it is still dynamic enough that it's dictated by the success of the coin. So us as a community don't have to try and predict the success, because it's impossible to do, right? It could stay at base value for 5 years. It could skyrocket in 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting point. So it still makes it a rule-based system where everybody knows what the rules are, and we've agreed to these rules. But it has some smarts in it, so that we're not fixed to always having to do this. Fixed to this constant, right? So, yeah, that's definitely an interesting proposition.
Yeah, and I think eventually the most ideal situation would be something like this is automated with like an Oracle or whatever needs to be created to basically make the node reward dynamic based on the value of SHM and fixed to like the minimum, like, whatever a value is that's incentivizing enough for node operators to operate nodes. I kind of view like, this, what we're discussing here, like the length of how long we add, distribute that 51%, similar to like a free trial with a product today. Like, people give away their product for free or incentivize you to use it for a certain period. And then, then people convert to paid customers and continue using that product. So trying to understand, like, with other smart contract platforms, how many people are joining at the beginning when max node rewards are distributed, and how many drop off over time. What's node operator retention look like? Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So the two things that are kind of hard to predict is the value of the coin in the future, and also the amount of transactions that the network will be getting in the future. because like if there's a lot of transactions happening and there's some transaction fees now going to the miners, that makes it so that you could reduce your node reward portion of it and then have this be able to go for a longer period of time.
There was a question in the chat. Will Shardium have an SHM burn mechanism in the future?
Right now, we haven't really discussed that, but I'll tell you one thing, like every network has a burn mechanism due to lost coins, right? There's, always people going to be forgetting their wallet passwords. There are going to be people that, pass away and never get to transfer it to somebody else. So there's, like, I remember one time Omar and I were discussing Bitcoin, and we came to the conclusion that in the long run, how Bitcoin will probably be lost, right? And I remember even in the early days of Bitcoin, some of the core developers at a meeting, they talked about the possibility that Bitcoins that aren't moved for, like, say 10 years or 20 years or something like that can get recycled and again be used for node rewards, right? So that way, you still have that amount of Bitcoin out there, and that, it's kind of like, make sure that things, people forgetting their wallet passwords or, not being able to pass it on, they don't end up causing these coins to get, like, just permanently lost, right? So, so there was a concept of doing something like that as well to ensure that 21 million Bitcoin will actually always be like 21 million Bitcoin.
Yeah, and hopefully there will be some innovations to help with this stuff. I mean, like, I envision, people today are probably putting the private keys to their wallets in their will so that when they pass away, like, that information is accessible. But hopefully there's some sort of, application in the future that, you can set up like a smart contract somehow that, when you pass away, the tokens in your wallet are distributed to the people you set in your will. Kind of a morbid topic, but yeah, there needs to be some user experience type stuff to make this technology adopted around the world.
Yeah, but getting back to that question, we don't have any kind of a burn mechanism planned right now. It is just maximum supply limit, but there will be lost coins, so there's going to always be some small amount of burning.
Don't lose your coins, Andrew.
I imagine, like, society is going to be better at hanging on to and passing wallets on in 10, 20 years than they are today. So that'll also.
Yeah.
So I guess we've talked a little bit about, like, the node distribution life cycle, but then there's also, like, the node reward individually for standby, validator, and archive nodes. Andrew, you've had some interesting ideas about, the node reward for standby nodes and determining, how do we get people to, sit in standby, especially when it's fully random. What were your thoughts? What have you thought so far on how to incentivize the standby nodes?
Well, my first line of thinking had involved something where standby nodes are building up, like, basically coupons that when they become active nodes, they cash in over a period of time. But we kind of went away from that because it could be with a lot of interest, you could have a lot of standby nodes, and perhaps they wouldn't. They're helping secure the network, but they might not get picked as an active node. So it would be nicer if there's a way to reward standby nodes just for being standby nodes, because they do help the security of the network. And so what you want out of that is you don't want people to farm the standby list with nodes that are, sitting there trying to join, but they're really like super thin, very minimal resources allocated per instance or something like that. I mean, now the staking, the staking does help, though. That helps a lot. So that's one thing that prevents farming. But there are also some ways we could have, and this would have a dual benefit. Basically, a proof of compute that happens every once in a while for standby nodes, and it would be done in such a way. I won't like spell out the details now, but like, because it's all just it's also just ideas too that have to be worked out. But in general, it'd be nice to have a proof of compute, so that that people on standby are actually allocating real hardware. So if they get accepted in 1 minute, their node has the compute and storage memory that it needs to join the network. The added benefit is that nodes running this proof of compute kind of also helps, like, maybe catch a node that accidentally was like hosted with like not the right hardware level either. And so I would use this I would tie this proof of compute to a system that also assigns reward. Like, there's ways you can have a network sign your proof of compute. Have the network sign your proof of compute, and then that can be.
I think I like the compute word better.
Yeah, proof of compute. That's it.
And when standby nodes become say validator nodes, if they aren't able to do that, is there a thought about a mechanism to stop them going back on the standby list for a certain period of time? And if it happens once, it's maybe like, say, a week. If it happens twice, it's maybe a couple of weeks. And if these nodes just try and farm the reward for being standby, and they constantly go to be a validator node and just get pushed back, basically stops them being able to do that time and time again.
Yeah, that would make sense, because like the proof of stake. Or that's a good idea.
Well, it's going to be hard to track which node it was a little bit, but just having the whole slashing mechanism there, where like if you're selected but you don't actually join and start participating, then after some time, then we decide that, okay, you're not joining the network, so therefore we're gonna just slash you a little bit, right? So doing something like that hopefully will prevent those kind of things, so that like the slash is more than the reward that you get, so there's no point to actually even trying to farm a reward.
Yeah, and it's just making sure that never is the case, that just basically farming a standby node never becomes more profitable.
Exactly.
Slashing when it gets slashed. So
yeah.
Sense.
And then there's also the whole aspect of how much do we want to give to like validator nodes versus the archive nodes as well, right? That ratio. So archive nodes are basically nodes that are much beefier than a validator node. They'll be receiving all of the transactions that happen on the network and archiving those transactions. They would probably need like much, beefier like network cards in there, more CPU, more RAM, more disk space. So these nodes, like let's say an validator node, like actually I can show you this. Like for $50, you can get a really decent validator node. I'll paste this in the chat here.
And someone asked, can anyone participate in the alpha testnet, or is it limited access?
So I think initially we won't be having nodes joining, but towards the end of that quarter, we'll get closer to allowing more people to join. And then when we go to BetaNet, for sure, nodes will be able to join the network.
So it may be permissioned to start for node operators, but from a user perspective, anyone can join, right, and deploy smart contracts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anybody could. Well, you don't have to join the network to deploy a smart contract, right? Yep. You can always just deploy smart contracts without having a node in the network. So I posted a link there for a server that basically costs about $50, but it has like a 0.5 terabyte SSD, 32 gigs of RAM. How many cores is it? Yeah, like 12 cores. So it's a pretty nice system for just $50 a month. And so now if the node reward per month is like even, let's say, I don't know, $500 a month that you could collect, that would be like you're making 10x, right? And so I think that would attract a lot of validator nodes wanting to join the network. And then what would happen is that you would have so many validator nodes that are wanting to join the network that then it ends up that, okay, your time, like let's say we didn't pay anything to the nodes that are sitting in standby, but only when you join the network, you receive something. Then there would end up being this balance of like, the number of nodes in standby will increase, but then eventually it will not want to increase because now it's not as profitable to be, running this node, and, you only get paid when you're in the network, right? So I think there'll be some balance that automatically happens due to just if there's no other validator or standby nodes out there, then you're going to make a lot of money, right? It's kind of like mining in Bitcoin. As more and more people mine, the amount of Bitcoin that you get ends up being less, and so not everybody. It's not profitable for everybody to mine, and so So I think that balance will automatically happen between the standby nodes and the validator nodes. But then the other thing we have to kind of like maybe tweak with some parameter is how much do we want to give the validator nodes versus the archive nodes.
And in terms of how many of each, is it a 1-to-1 ratio? We're going to need a 1-to-1 ratio of archive nodes versus validator nodes, or would you ideally want more of one than the other?
Yeah, I think it's our archive nodes will probably be somewhere like a number like 20 or something like that, whereas the number of validator nodes will be in the thousands.
And when you're on that standby list, do you get the decision whether you become a validator node or an archive node? And again, going back to this trust piece, if it is more profitable, which I'm not saying it is, to be an archive node, could there be some piece in that where you're a validator node for a set period of time and you almost earn the right to become a archive node at that point? Or is it just literally just open and getting lottery type of deal?
I think most people will be only able to do like a validator node. I'm thinking that like for running an archive node, it'll be more like a system where you want some professional node operators to run archive nodes, where they get something in a really good data center. It's a super beefy machine, and they're very versed in maintaining these nodes and keeping them online all the time. Because these archive nodes, you don't want them coming in and out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Archive nodes need to store the full history of the blockchain, so they basically have to be super nodes over time, because they need more like hardware resources to store that blockchain history. So, that's going to limit the amount of people that can actually operate archive nodes. That's why there will be more validator nodes, because it's like less expensive. But Omar, maybe we could talk about, I guess there's some people.
Yeah, I do wanted to mention that you don't have any loss of decentralization or security with these archive nodes being like these super nodes, because they're not involved in the consensus. They're not going to affect which transactions get accepted or any of that kind of things. They're just recording and storing that information. And then it's just a matter of like how much redundancy do we want in the archive nodes.
So there was this question in the chat you probably saw that was going to prompt me to ask if you could just describe standby validator and archive nodes, because someone said I explained that validator nodes don't affect TPS because they're only storing the blockchain history, not involved in processing transactions. And then someone asked, in that case, security is compromised, right? It seems like decentralization and security is compromised.
Yeah, I saw that, and that's what I wanted to point out, that it's not compromised because the archive nodes are not involved in doing any of the consensus. That's completely the validator nodes doing that. Archive nodes, just look at it as a place to just store what has been consensus upon. But of course, you want to have enough archive nodes so that one of them going down doesn't impact anything.
What would happen if there was 20 of them and all 20 of them went down? To say, for some reason, a lot of these get hosted online. You mentioned $50 a month, so it isn't the same as essentially someone setting up their own little data centers everywhere. You might end up with a lot of them hosted on, say, AWS or something like that. What would happen if a lot of them went down? What is the redundancy?
Yeah, so for the archive nodes, wouldn't be like a $50 per month node. It would be probably, thousands of dollars per month node. But you also, we can, like with archive nodes, we don't even need them to be anonymous. We could have like a delegation type system as well too, right? So like if you look at Binance Smart Chain or some of these other networks, people who want to be node operators, they kind of put up like, here's my credentials, this is the kind of node I'm going to put up and so forth. And based on that, then people can say, well, we'll select these guys to be, the archive nodes, and maybe there's, a pretty large amount that you have to stake as well to be an archive node, and then they can accept, people can contribute their coins to these archive nodes to stake and maybe earn rewards off of that. So you can have a whole system like that as well. The question is, like, right now Binance Smart Chain is running with like 21 nodes. What if those get DDoS or all of them go offline? It could happen, but because they're being operated by professional people, the chances of that happening all at once is pretty low.
Yeah. So decentralization at the archive level doesn't really matter because they're not included in consensus, right? So, we could have requirements people need to meet to be able to operate archive nodes.
Right.
It's more of like an institutional investment to participate there. And was my idea I prompted previously about like, potentially a DAO operating an archive node, is that like a valid idea?
Yeah, I mean, it could be done. Definitely.
I suppose that the overarching question is how are those, and I think it was where we started on this topic, is how those rewards are split out for standby, archive, and validator nodes. And it's a difficult thing to answer straight off the bat.
Right. Yeah, and it's something that, we got to keep in mind and think about. But, the number of archive nodes will be, orders of magnitude less than the number of validator nodes, right? Like, let's say there's 10,000 validators nodes out there. There might only be like 20 to 50 archive nodes. And so, even though we're giving more, a per node reward for the archive nodes might be higher, just because the cost of running one is higher. Percentage-wise, I think the bulk of it will still be going to the validator nodes versus to the archive nodes.
The more difficult question is standby versus validator, because you've already alluded to it. There could be a situation where it becomes so profitable to be a validator node that you don't actually really even have to incentivize the standby nodes because they want to be on the network so badly. But I suppose at day one, that's not going to be the case. It's going to be the flip reverse of that, where you're going to need them more than they're going to need the project. So again, it's probably going to have to be something that's somewhat dynamic and flexible over time.
Well, there's also...
Yeah,
I think Andrew wanted to take the answer to that question. Andrew, you want to answer it?
Well, the amount of actual nodes that are allowed as validators, that is completely dynamic, and that scales with the load of the network. So that's where, anyhow, so like nodes like wanting to go from standby to validator, if I understood that was like, what, maybe I might have not quite got the question right.
You're not able to choose when you become a validator. It's at random.
That's correct. It's random, and the amount let in is also based on like network load over time.
Yeah, and then you can't just stay as a validator forever. Nodes get cycled out.
Yeah, getting rotated out is very like core to the security and just operation of everything. So you'll rotate in, you'll be a validator for a while, and then you'll like everyone about the same amount of time will get bumped back out, and then they'll become standby again.
And this rotation isn't the same for the archive nodes, right? They're much more static type of...
Exactly. Yeah, archive nodes are static. Yep.
But more expensive. Cool. Well, we've gone 12 minutes over here. Any other questions the community has? We really appreciate everyone's involvement. I guess, my final question, Omar, is, there's a lot of things about Shardium where, people can come and ask and we have a direct answer for because the technology has already been built. But when it comes to network parameters right now, some of these, our answers are, ambiguous because they haven't been, the parameters haven't been defined yet. Are we going to set like a roadmap or a timeline when, like we actually, the community needs to come together and decide on these things so, people can start preparing and thinking?
Yeah, definitely. So with the Shardist side, things are well defined because we've been working on it for a long time. But the Shardium part of it is kind of like the application, right? And so these are all application parameters in terms of like, how you want to do the node reward, what are going to be the parameters for the SHM release, things like that. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of get people's, thought processes started with this meeting to start thinking about this. And, if you sit down and really think deeply about these different aspects of it, would be good to like maybe write it up in a document, right? And put it out there for other people to look at and why you came up with the numbers you did. And maybe you might do some research and look at other networks, like what Greg was saying. Why do, maybe we shouldn't just try to, come up with these things willy-nilly. We could look at what has worked for other networks and so forth. So if we do, we depend on the community to help us with that research, right? So if you guys can do research on those things and say hey, this model has worked really well for this coin or something like that, that'll be useful information to have. But these things are something that we don't have to really finalize all of this until we get to mainnet, right? But we can experiment with it while we're in Alphanet and BetaNet and, see how, things work out. But by the time we get to mainnet, we better have, some pretty well-defined ideas for what these parameters are going to be like. But this is a good time to start thinking about it and getting the community involved.
Awesome. Yeah. I think we should at least try to set a timeline or a date prior to mainnet when, these answers will be, decided. That way now when people, are questioning or asking, we can just say, that the network parameters is going to be decided by the community and the decisions will be made by the state, rather than just, we're not sure, we need to come together as a community to decide these things.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely probably will want, these parameters to be defined at least a month or so before we do the mainnet launch. So, All right, great. Thank you everybody for participating. And, hope this conversation got, your juices flowing to think about, how the node reward system should work. That's going to be a very important aspect of, the whole Shardium system and its success in the future. So, think about it. If you if you can write up something, or if you research something and share it with the community, those kind of things will be really beneficial. All right, great. Thanks everybody for joining.
Great idea today, Inga Mills. Thanks for your participation.
Thanks everyone. Speak soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Guys.